It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, though rather a noisy one. The repairs being conducted by O'Brien and Eggnog are not subtle ones, and the result is Quarks being all but deserted. That might be for the best based on the minor kaboom just as O'Brien finishes. Long story short, Deep Space Nine has some maintenance needs we're unable to fulfill, as the parts can't be replicated and the cardigans aren't likely to sell as spares. This is Starfleet though, so we'll solve it the Starfleet way, by going to nick some. Theft is such a dirty word, which is why we're using the term salvage. There's a cardigan station called Empok Nor that they abandoned when shit kicked off with the Klingons, and it's built to the same design as Deep Space Nine. They showed no interest in retaking it since joining the Dominion, so we're calling Bagsy and going over there to rob the shit out of it. Cardigans like their booby traps though, many of which are set to attack any non-cardigan, so we're taking plain simple Garak with us after Sisko appeals to his better nature with a sufficiently large bribe. I'm sure it'll be fine though, as away missions are perfectly safe as long as we only take known characters. Speaking of which, let's meet John, Paul, George and Ringo, who'll be the rest of our away team. At least Eggnog's seen enough Star Trek to bring some artillery with him, this little jaunt being O'Brien's idea of a reward for him. A rifle's no good if you're not willing to use it though, and his overly defensive attitude in a strategy game with plain simple Garak as we travel leaves the latter unimpressed. Plain simple Garak would much rather play O'Brien, him having combat experience of some note, though O'Brien's not delighted at having his past fighting cardigans brought up. We arrive at Empok Nor to our first problem. Plain simple Garak suspects trying to teleport over would result in us having a very bad day indeed, so we need to dock. Eggnog's a quick learner and assumes traps on airlocks too, so over plain simple Garak goes in a suit to sort things first. He gets everything running again, but unfortunately everything seems to include some distinctly dodgy-looking pods, at least one of which is inhabited by a person who's now awake. With that sorted, we dock and split into teams. O'Brien, Eggnog and John will grab the essentials, George and Ringo the next most important items, and plain simple Garak will be looking for anything else of value with Paul. Plain simple Garak sorted the security system after checking the dock, but that doesn't mean there are no traps left, so O'Brien advises caution anyway. It doesn't take long for things to start going pear-shaped. Plain simple Garak sticks his hand in some goop on the promenade stairs, something Paul says is biological. That might be connected to those pods in the infirmary. The two lit ones are now open and empty, the third inhabited by a corpse due to the piece of hardware that smashed it. Plain simple Garak calls O'Brien down to take a look, while Eggnog goes back to the mega shuttle to grab a tool. Or not, as the mega shuttle is no longer docked, and then becomes no longer a mega shuttle. We're in deep shit. It doesn't take long to connect two empty stasis units and a mysteriously kabooming mega shuttle. A military badge on the corpse identifies them as a member of a particularly nasty group, and John thinks they were left here to defend the place from thieving bastards like us. That would certainly explain the science wibbly now preventing scans. And that leaves us with a problem. We can't Scarpa now, and the phone here was smashed when the former occupants buggered off. O'Brien thinks he can rig a replacement for one-way signals to summon help, but that's going to require a few different jobs being done first. A quick rework of the teams has John and Ringo restoring a generator, Paul and George doing a science, and O'Brien with Eggnog and plain simple Garak to rig the gubbins for a signal. With a warning to try and avoid using comm badges in case they're being monitored, away we all go again. Plain simple Garak's not so sure about our mystery cardigans. Some lads being left in pods just in case of intruders doesn't sound like the sort of thing even the most die-hard zealot would volunteer for. We could ask, I suppose, as there's one sneaking up on Eggnog, but he's called over by O'Brien, so we don't get the chance. Probably just as well, given how that goes for John and Ringo. A distraction with a lift separates them, then Ringo gets grabbed as he's cocking about. John watches him from the upper level as he's dragged away and tries to call for help, only to get twatted and thrown over the side. O'Brien, Eggnog and plain simple Garak get there shortly after and find a pair of corpses. The news has Paul panicking despite O'Brien's attempts to calm him. Needing to split up again doesn't help, as there are still jobs to do, and the offer of sending Plain Simple Garak with Paul and George isn't going to happen. An increasingly irritable Plain Simple Garak has plans of his own, and they involve going off to murderize our mystery opponents before they can do it to him. George isn't chuffed at that idea and gets a bit threatening, something Plain Simple Garak attributes to his species. Even O'Brien speaking up in his defense doesn't help, Plain Simple Garak instead inviting O'Brien to join him in killing some cardigans like he did during the war. O'Brien tells him to piss off, so away Plain Simple Garak goes to use those skills he learned before he was a tailor. The first kill happens shortly after, noise in the infirmary leading to an ambush from Plain Simple Garak hiding in the broken pod. Eggnog's surprised to see him back so soon, not least of which because he locked the doors, but knowing one of our opponents is gone is good news. Less good is finding out the lad had been dosed up to the eyeballs, something Plain Simple Garak discovered after running some tests in the infirmary. He thinks it's designed to boost xenophobia and thus make cardigan soldiers more effective against other species, and O'Brien suggests it not quite working as intended might be why they were left here during the evacuation. That still leaves one of them, though, and he's currently stalking Paul and George. What he doesn't know is that Plain Simple Garak is stalking him. Not quite quickly enough, though, and Paul receives an unfortunate neck massage while George is throwing around anger and slurs instead of guarding him. Plain Simple Garak returns the favour with some yellow poop, so that's our problem solved. Or not, as Plain Simple Garak isn't quite done yet, and stabs George with the tool he was fetching. O'Brien comes to check when they don't respond to a call, and finds George with just enough time left to explain who stabbed him before he cocks it. Not hanging about seems prudent, so we move while O'Brien suggests Plain Simple Garak is likely affected by the same drug as our two assailants. He also thinks continuing with the current plan would be a bust too. Plain Simple Garak knows it, so will be waiting for them, which is why they're going to try and hunt him down instead. That becomes unnecessary when he calls O'Brien. He's found another copy of the game he asked O'Brien to play on the Mega Shuttle, specifically mentioning that he found it in the commander's office. Sounds like a trap, so as official representatives of Starfleet, it's our job to bumble right into it. Splitting up seems smart until O'Brien hits a force field that prevents him from stopping Eggnog being nabbed by Plain Simple Garak. He backs out with Eggnog at gunpoint, then disables the force field, blocking O'Brien. That's a good time for a monologue, one where Plain Simple Garak tries to argue O'Brien is every bit the enthusiastic killer that he is. His war record speaks for itself. O'Brien's had enough of this shit, though, and suggests a showdown. They meet on the promenade after O'Brien has passed John, Paul, George and Ringo strung up for the lols. To be fair, Plain Simple Garak also has the two cardigan lads there, so it's a mixed audience. It doesn't really surprise either of them that the other brought weapons, despite saying they wouldn't. Plain Simple Garak makes O'Brien lower his with a threat to Eggnog, including the sneaky hidden one and tricorder, the latter of which he opens when putting it down. Plain Simple Garak disarms himself too, all the better for a bit of a wrestle. If he was hoping for a proper finale, he'll be disappointed as O'Brien gets floored a couple of times, but then he doesn't need to win, not when he's rigged the tricorder and weapon to kaboom. He triggers them with his badge and knocks Plain Simple Garak on his arse, unconscious. We're back on DS9 and Plain Simple Garak is being treated by Bashir. The drug's out of his system now and O'Brien wants to talk to him. He says there'll be a formal inquiry into what happened, and Plain Simple Garak asks for a favour. It's not to speak in his defence, as O'Brien expects, but to pass on his condolences to the wife of George, the guy he stabbed. Not that Plain Simple Garak got out of this uninjured. The kaboom broke some ribs, though O'Brien admits to him the intention was significantly more fatal. That seems like a fair play to Plain Simple Garak, so we'll leave him to deal with losing the game, and that being the preferable outcome under the circumstances, until the next adventure. A horror story then, something we don't tend to see much on the channel. The relative rarity of horror plots is not particularly surprising when you remember this is supposed to be a family show. A conflation of horror and gore in the eyes of Hollywood does much to explain the absence, actual anxiety-inducing stories being far more difficult than buckets of blood, and thus rarer. It makes for a pleasing change of pace then, attempts at something different being welcome here. That doesn't mean it gets a free pass, though, and I've an issue with how Plain Simple Garak behaves on the way to Empok Nor. The story needs us to know that O'Brien has military experience against Cardigans, but does so by means of needling from Plain Simple Garak, and for me, I don't think it quite sits right. Plain Simple Garak dicks with people on occasion, certainly, but there's a logic behind it. Bashir is the obvious choice because Bashir actively enjoys and engages with it. He understands the game and chooses to partake. Plain Simple Garak's previous round of bullshittery with Worf is a slightly different matter, that not being a mutual decision, but there's a playfulness to it, and he makes it very clear during proceedings that he's fucking about. He's mocking, but not directly of Worf. Even his verbal ding-dong with Quark could be considered more warning than conflict. The interaction with O'Brien on the shuttle is different, an exchange that's significantly more mean-spirited. Plain Simple Garak's previous sparring with others has been to entertain himself or misdirect or pursue a desired outcome. This episode carries a different flavour, and that's before he becomes infected. If we're generous, we could put that down to patriotism. Despite all that's happened, all that's been done to him by his own people, they are still his people. A latent dislike of O'Brien for the actions of the past is understandable. Or would be if this had been referenced between the two of them at any point in the last 5 years. It comes out of the blue, this being the first time I can think of that we've seen any sort of confrontation between them. We can't plausibly put this down to an innocent error either. To suggest he didn't know how this would be received requires believing he's ill-informed, which is the very last accusation you could level at Plain Simple Garak. Being morally nebulous might be Plain Simple Garak's shtick, but that's not the same thing as acting randomly. He is consistent in his smoke and mirrors, saving the acid tongue only for those he truly dislikes. That the person we've regularly seen him behave this way towards previously is Seagull Dukat serves to underline just how out of character it is here. That single, albeit quite important point aside, the rest of the plot was fine. I doubt anybody was surprised by the newbies all carking it, but then that's why they were there, to establish how serious the threat was. Perhaps we should start calling them whipping boys instead of red shirts, such characters existing solely for the purpose of taking the punishment that we can't give to those with plot armor. There were some nice touches, though. Seeing Plain Simple Garak rubbing his hand without the camera lingering on it is pleasing, a nod that ramps up later with increasing examples of physical symptoms. I think this episode might also have the first example of a jump scare in the series. It's certainly the first one I can remember, so do take to the comments if I'm mistaken. The main takeaway from the episode is an almost accidental inclusion then, that of George using the spoonhead slur in background conversation. The lines were not intended to be clearly audible and thus didn't go through the same editorial channels. When it was noticed by producers, they decided to leave it in. Whilst I do wonder how much that decision was influenced by needing to re-record lines if they changed it and the associated cost, I also still think it's the right decision. We've had previous examples of how Starfleet and the Federation in general isn't always as inclusive as suggested. The idea of Starfleet having any sort of racism in it might have been a red line for Roddenberry, but we're not always the people we'd like to be under pressure, and watching your mates get murderized is pretty stressful. That said, I do think making more of a deal of it would have been preferable, especially when the guy he's saying it to is another species. We could even have had Plain Simple Garak ask him about it before the stabbing, playing more into the xenophobia aspect of the drug, but we're into the realm of armchair directing again, so let's leave it be. Regardless of the reasoning, including the line serves to add another grey area to a series that excels in such places. One last thing, John here, played by Margene Holden, is a member of the Babylon 5 crossover club. She played an unnamed Earth Force navigator in the movie A Call to Arms.
You could also argue she gets a second entry too, as she played Dr. Sarah Chambers, a main character in the spin-off series Crusade. End of episode.
I can't believe there's nothing we can substitute for Leola root. All these species, all these ingredients, and nothing.
Yes, if only there was something we could use.
Alas, the universe is not that kind.
Something that's actually pretty obvious when you stop for a second to think about it.
I certainly agree it'd be useful, but there's no point lamenting that which is not.
Something that had been featured multiple times over a number of episodes to hammer home how bad it is.
Such an item would truly save this entire plotline from failure at the last second, and restore all faith in the planning abilities of the guy who writes these.
How unfortunate then that Deep Space Nine doesn't have a canonically terrible culinary experience such as Yamak sauce.
Yeah, that stuff were bloody awful.
Really? It's that bad, eh?
Yeah, anyone who's not Cardigan said that stuff tastes like a gopher's. Oh, for fuck's sake.
Finally. Woof.